So you might be asking, why ITIL v4? Didn't we have a good thing going with version 3? Well, there's some things that have changed. So since 3 was released in 2007, things like cloud computing was just starting to gain traction. People were still unsure, was this something they were going to want to adopt or not? And was it a viable alternative to some of the data center computing that they've already invested heavily in? And there weren't very good established practices or guidance provided for ITIL for how to manage that sort of environment. Artificial intelligence and machine learning was just in its infancy and nowhere to be found, but I doubt there are many organizations now that aren't at least considering AI or machine learning or some of these types of new technologies. Big data, Internet of Things, all of these concepts that came out since 2007 or have been out for a while but have really gained traction in recent years, ITIL doesn't provide that guidance. So a refresh was required to be able to make sure that they could keep pace with the modern world. Secondly, ITIL 4 provides a more holistic picture of IT-enabled service delivery. So cloud services, which are huge now, platforms as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, partners, suppliers. ITIL 4 provides an end-to-end modeling and management for service delivery. It also reflects and integrates other established ways of working. So it acknowledges that there's other governance frameworks out there like COBIT and PMBOK. It integrates with DevOps models like Agile and Lean, and work methods like Scrum and Kanban. And it still includes all the best of ITIL v3. So we didn't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't have to go home and start rewriting all of our process and procedure documents. And the big key in ITIL 4, the big message, is that they're trying to create value. There's a tremendous focus on value. Whereas ITIL 3 had more of a focus on the services themselves and their respective outcomes, ITIL 4 really emphasizes the delivery of value with those outcomes. So what's new in ITIL 4? Well, there's a bunch, but today we're going to focus on 6 items in particular. The guiding principles of service management. It's 7 principles that represent the core messages of ITIL and of service management in general. Next, we'll look at the 4 dimensions of ITIL to support the holistic approach to service management. Then there's a service value system, or the SVS, and we'll cover the ITIL SVS, which explains how all the components and activities of an organization work together as a system to enable the creation of value between the service provider and its customers. The service value chain, which digs a little deeper, and we'll look at an operating model that defines the key activities which are required to respond to demand, enable value creation through the formation and management of those products and services. And then we've got practices in ITIL 4. So we've got processes in ITIL 3, and they've evolved effectively into practices in ITIL 4. We'll take a quick look at the differences between the previous processes in 3 and what are now practices in 4. And then lastly, we'll cover the certification updates. So a lot of folks who got certified under 3, there's a new certification scheme structure in ITIL 4 that we'll cover briefly. So the first big change is this notion of these guiding principles. First of which is a focus on value. This principle aims at creating value for customers of a service, essentially. Establishing value first requires an understanding of who our customers are, because service providers can only create value if they know who's going to use the service and what they're going to get out of it. So the first step is to identify and understand the consumers of the services as well as other stakeholders involved. And then it's also, in addition to that, it's also necessary to understand that customer's perspective on value and realize that as circumstances change, we might need to be able to respond with a new definition of value as needed. This focus on value also suggests that we need to be keenly aware of the customer experience, continually improve that experience so that they continue to realize value and it doesn't get stale. The next principle is to start where you are. Seems evident enough, but all too often we'll start by saying, we don't assess our current situation before we proceed down a path. It asks, really, what do we already have in front of us? So let's not start from scratch. Let's analyze the current state. Let's see what we might be able to reuse. What are lessons learned? What are some experiences from other teams that may have undergone a similar process? And then let's collect and use that information to identify what might be useful and helpful in delivering value. The next guiding principle is to progress iteratively with feedback. Excuse me. And that means we break down initiatives into smaller, more manageable components so that we can gather input and feedback more quickly and reduce the likelihood that the end deliverable doesn't meet with our customers' expectations. It's a bit of a departure from the classic waterfall approach to project management and adopts a more flexible, agile principle used successfully in the software development lifecycle. Collaborate and promote visibility. So one of the biggest challenges facing businesses is the tendency to work in silos with a lack of transparency. So this principle aims to break down those barriers and break us out of those silos and encourage collaboration. Dick referenced it earlier. We really want to collaborate. We want to avoid confusion when the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So this collaboration also fosters creativity and potentially offers new insights that teams working in silos might not have otherwise considered to provide even more value to the product or service. And then promoting visibility helps establish trust between teams. That, in turn, helps those teams with the sharing of information needed in that collaboration process. And then lastly, identifying stakeholders is also key because it provides the audience for collaboration activities and with whom visibility and transparency should be established. Another principle is to think and work holistically, which simply means working together in a very integrated way. If everyone understands they're part of a bigger, clearly stated goal, and keep in mind the fundamental focus on value, our first principle, it'll help us guide us to the production of successful outcomes. Next is to keep it simple and practical. This focuses on simplifying complex work methods, identifying and eliminating processes, services, actions, or metrics that really don't add any fundamental value to the outcome. This is also referred to as outcome-based thinking. And probably a important and very big one, I don't necessarily mean any more important than the others, but optimizing and automating. So this focuses on optimizing the work carried out by its human and technical resources. It suggests that organizations should automate work to the extent that requires minimal human intervention as appropriate. ITIL 4 provides some specific guidance on optimization. First is understanding and agreeing on the proposed optimizations, assessing the current state of the proposed optimization and where it can be improved, and which improvement opportunities are likely to produce the biggest positive impact. Agreeing what the future state and priorities of the organization should be, focusing on simplification and, again, value. This typically also includes standardization of practices and services, which make it easier to optimize further at a later point. And then ensuring that these optimizations have the appropriate level of stakeholder engagement and commitment. Next, executing those improvements in an iterative way, borrowing from another principle, using metrics and other feedback to check that progress, stay on track, and adjust the approach to the optimization as needed. And lastly, continually monitoring the impact of that optimization to identify opportunities to improve methods of working. Most organizations already understand the benefits of automation, but just to name a few: improved availability, improved productivity, cost reduction, better performance, better reliability, the list goes on. Most folks don't need to be convinced that automation is important. The next key item within ITIL 4, a new concept that they've introduced, are the 4 dimensions. These were defined by the ITIL authors to offer us a holistic, balanced approach to service management. And if you're familiar with version 3, you might notice some similarity with the 4 Ps of people, process, products, and partners. So first, when we're working on initiatives, we can find ourselves focusing on too much in one area, sometimes ignoring other aspects completely. But by not taking all 4 of these dimensions into account, it can lead to issues with quality, efficiency, support and maintainability, or expected outcomes. The first dimension is organizations and people, making sure we take into consideration things like organizational structure. What are the roles and responsibilities, lines of reporting, systems of authority, communication models, uh, organizational culture, the shared beliefs and values, attitudes, both written and unwritten rules within a given organization. Common organizational objectives. Is it clearly defined so that value is understood when working and thinking holistically? And then skills and competencies. It's not only important to understand what you can do, but what your peers can do. And that's going to help you understand who should be part of that collaborative effort. The next dimension is information and technology. So first, information. Well, what information will the services manage? Effectively managing the information is the primary way of delivering value to those customers. What supporting information and knowledge do we require in order to deliver and manage those services? It's essential to keep optimizing services, considering things like availability, reliability, accessibility, timeliness and accuracy of information, and the exchange of information between services. It's critical to understand the information architecture used by the services that we create and deliver. And then, how will we protect and manage, archive, dispose of the information and knowledge assets? Things like regulations, security risks, compliance requirements should all be considered when developing and supporting services. And then the technology aspect. Considerations include, is the technology compatible with our existing architecture of the organization and its customers? Will the technology products used by the organization and stakeholders work together? How do the emerging technologies influence this service? Will the technology continue to be viable in the foreseeable future? Is the organization willing to accept the risk of using aging technology, or maybe embracing emerging or unproven technologies? The next dimension is partners and suppliers, which are involved at every phase of product development or service management, such as design, development, deployment, delivery, support, continual improvement. So maintaining healthy relationships with partners and suppliers is necessary for companies and service organizations to deliver a service's value expected by our customers. The last being value streams and processes. So ITIL 4 provides a model known as the ITIL service value chain, which we'll discuss more in a moment. This model can follow different patterns, and the patterns within the value chain are called value streams. Some of you might recognize this term borrowed from the Lean Agile framework. So a value stream is a series of steps that an organization uses to create and deliver products and services to its customers. A process is a set of activities that transform inputs into defined outputs. Processes define the sequence of actions and their dependencies. Now, enveloping all four of the dimensions are what we call external factors, which follow the PESO model. P for political factors, government policy oversees regional stability, foreign trade policy, labor laws, tax policy, etc. The E being for economic factors, growth, interest rates, exchange rates, inflation, disposable income, those types of trends. S for social factors, population growth, age distribution, health consciousness, other emerging trends. T for technological factors, new production and distribution models and technologies, new communication methods. L for legal factors, health and safety, equal opportunity, consumer rights, product safety, trade regulation, some examples. And then lastly, E for environmental factors, the availability of raw materials, pollution targets, climate change, carbon emissions, waste disposal, sustainability, etc. So one practical example of how external factors influence the development and operation of services are data protection laws like GDPR in Europe that have changed the way companies collect, process, access, and store customer data, as well as how they work with external partners and suppliers. Many organizations have had to completely redesign their services as a result of GDPR going into effect. The next new concept is the service value system, which explains how the components and activities of the organization work together as a system to create value. On the left hand, we see the inputs to the system. On the right, we see the expected outcomes. And in the middle are the components of the service value system, or SVS. The inputs to the SVS are opportunity, which are the options and possibilities that add value for stakeholders, and demand, which is the need or desire for products and services among internal and external consumers. And the output of the SVS simply is value in terms of perceived benefits, usefulness, and importance. Within the SVS itself, we see the guiding principles at the top, the value and recommendations that organizations in all circumstances, all types of work, all initiatives, and supporting activities. Governance is the means by which the organization is directed and controlled. So ITIL is including provisions, as I mentioned previously, for governance models such as COBIT and PMBOK. The service value chain in the middle are the set of activities performed by the organization to deliver a valuable product or service to its customers. Underpinning that are practices. It's the set of organizational resources designed to perform the work or accomplish some objective. This could be things like a service desk or a change advisory board. And then surrounding and underpinning everything is continual improvement. It's the recurring activity to ensure that an organization's performance is continually meeting stakeholders' expectations. So the service value system is the model or the framework for developing supporting services for customers that provide value. Next, we have the service value chain. I've got the inset there that shows this is the middle portion that we were talking about just a second ago in the service value system. So within that SVS, we can see the service value chain is that central component. Now, this is the operating model that defines the key activities required to address opportunity and demand and enable the creation of value through the development and management of products and services. And there are 6 key value chain activities. It's to plan, improve, engage, design, transition, obtain or build, and deliver and support. The plan activity helps to ensure that there's a shared understanding of the vision, current state, and direction for improvement of all products and services across provided by the organization. The purpose of the improved value chain activity is to ensure the continual improvement of products, services, and practices. If you haven't noticed yet, continual improvement is a key theme in ITIL 4. There was an improvement component in the SVS model. There's another one here. And there's also a practice of continual improvement, which was also a process in ITIL version 3. Next, the engage activities, where we develop a good understanding of stakeholder needs. It establishes the transparency and communication. It sets the foundation for continued agreement, engagement, and good relationship with our stakeholders. Next, the design and transition activity makes sure that the products and services are continually meeting stakeholder expectations for things like quality, costs, time to market. The obtain and build step makes sure that the components needed by a product or service are available when and where they are needed, and that they meet the agreed specifications. And then deliver and support ensures that services are delivered and supported across the agreed service level commitments and meet our stakeholders' expectations. To summarize, the service value chain are the activities necessary to develop, deliver, support the services we provide. Each service has one or more value streams associated with them, and is made up of the activities and practice needed for that particular service. Different value streams can and will have different activities and practices. The service value chain is the framework to ensure that that value is consistently delivered to customers and stakeholders. So I know we're running low on time. I've got a couple more slides that I just want to address at a high level. So I mentioned that we've gone from processes to practices. So, and the ITIL authors' infinite wisdom, they really tried to cut down on the number of processes that they had. So we used to have 26, and now we have 34. So that's a little joke. Reality is there's been a lot more introduced in ITIL 4, and again, things like cloud management and software development, things that are have come along a long way, have actually demanded that they be noted as an additional practice. But quickly, you see the key. We've got some new practices such as organizational change management, workforce and talent management, business analysis, infrastructure and platform management, and then some changes. So measurement and reporting, they've been elevated now from functions into general management practices. Change management is now called change control. Release and deployment management have been split up into their own practices. We've got service asset configuration management. We've been split into IT asset management and service configuration management. So it's no longer SACM. There's two distinct practices. And then we've got service desk that's been elevated from a function to a practice. And then application development. And then the last slide I have here is on certification updates. So foundation is still foundation, and that underpins everything, as you can see. If you were an ITIL practitioner, those are now designated as ITIL specialists. And we see that we've actually created a few different specialists at that level. We've got ITIL strategist and ITIL leader that have been introduced. An ITIL expert is now managing professional over here on the left-hand side. And then the ITIL strategic leader is a new designation, which is comprised of the ITIL strategist and ITIL leader designations. Once you've got both your managing professional and strategic leader, you're eligible to go through the certification to pursue the certification as a designation of ITIL master. So those are some of the changes. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dick and/or Valerie.
Okay, great job, Ezra. Way to go. I have a couple of questions here, and I'll go through them. And I know we are running up against the bottom of the hour, and if anybody needs to hop off, feel free to do so. But I think the questions are all oftentimes the best part of the whole presentation. So having said that, and by the way, I forgot to mention that we are giving away, for those of you that were wondering, an official ITIL 4 Foundation Manual giveaway. So we'll do that drawing, and I think that you should get an email if you win, and we'll mail that out to you. So good luck to the lucky winner. Okay. So the first question here is how I have an ITIL 3 Foundation. How do I get to ITIL 4? Is there a shortcut, or do you just have to take the whole certification class?
So the quick answer to that is they're still developing the courseware, but there is going to be a bridge exam. So it's not going to be the full ITIL 4 foundation class that you would have to retake. They're going to have bridges. And similarly, they will have bridges for things like the ITIL expert to bridge into the managing professional. You're not going to have to take all of those courses all over again. Because, again, borrowing heavily from ITIL 3, a lot of the concepts are reused and frankly, the same. So it's really understanding the differences. If you've got your previous certifications, you're going to make sure that you're up to date with the latest differences.
Yeah, and there's a lot of online web-based training out there, I would suspect, too. So, right, if you wanted to just get up to speed, and then where the money is you'd have to pay whatever the cost is to get certified. So there's an exam fee or certification fee, right?
I believe so. Yeah, different accreditation companies do it differently.
Yep. Okay. Next question here is how do you translate ITIL 4 into practice? And that's a pretty broad question, but maybe one thing that I can kind of think of is, ITIL 3 has gotten a little bit of criticism because it's focused more on stability and process, and along came DevOps, and it's all about speed and agility, and everybody was saying, well, if it's going to take me longer to fill out all the paperwork, not really paperwork, but I think you know what I mean, in order to do a change request, why bother? I'll just go ahead and do the change, and because it's just a simple change anyway. So I think isn't that something that ITIL 4 is focusing more on, is speed, so that they're going to cut out some of the unnecessary things, the steps that you might have to go through to get a change request through?
That's correct. It's really on delivering value. So it's not so much going through the steps in the process because you have to, but it's recognizing that anytime we go through this process, that there is a realization of value for our customers, and to have that in mind when we're designing these services and supporting these services. Because if in the end it's not really delivering that value, then you have to seriously question, why are we doing this? And this model, this framework, is essentially forcing people to look at that aspect of it, not to do something for the sake of doing it, but rather, in the end, what's that final outcome that we can expect? And are we making sure that we're keeping all the right people in the loop? We've got our stakeholders, we've got our customers, we've got that feedback that's progressing iteratively to make sure that we're hitting our marks. So again, whereas ITIL, and especially if you look at the old service design and service strategy, they were kind of built in silos. We're going to design this service, we're going to then pass it off to the operations team to figure out how to support that service, et cetera. And this is trying to bring everybody together much earlier to have that service strategy, that service design, and service operations sort of all at the table, developing these services and the support plan for these services in conjunction with each other, pretty much in unison or at the same time.
Okay, well, here's another question that says, how do we get started with ITIL? And I think that's kind of a broad question and I'm not sure there's perhaps a number of different ways that you can get started. But what comes to mind is that when we go to our customers, a lot of them think that they're more or a lot farther along in terms of their process maturity than they actually are. And a lot of customers will spend a lot of money, for example, on a expensive toolkit, and maybe they'll do incident, maybe they'll take on change, or maybe they'll tackle change management, or even try to do some configuration management. But when we get there, we find out that the maturity level really isn't very, very high. So depending on, I guess, where you are, but how would you get started then if you said, hey, we really want to focus on our processes now. We've got the tool set. That doesn't seem to have helped us too much. Any suggestions, Ezra, in terms of what should somebody do?
Well, borrowing from a new guiding principle, start where you're at, right?
Yeah.
Let's assess where we are today and have an honest assessment. I think, Dick, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of people tend to put on the rosy glasses when we look internally and think of our own processes. Sometimes it helps to bring an outside perspective in, and to ask the hard questions. So oftentimes, if you ask somebody how things are running, they'll tell you, "Oh, it's great, it's great, it's great," but then behind a closed door, it'll be, "This is awful, this is awful, this is awful," and they're often unwilling to share the the messy stuff for fear of hurting feelings, et cetera. But really, it's an open and honest look at where you're at today, and then understanding where you want to go, and then figuring out, okay, what's the breakdown of steps necessary to get there. And it's not always evident, but ITIL does provide the guidance to help you when you start to recognize that we're probably not doing X, Y, or Z as efficiently as we could. Well, how do we make those gradual improvements? And that's where ITIL comes in to actually help you. So again, start where you're at, assess lessons learned, open, honest opinion. Where do you need improvement? And then let's figure out the work plan to get up there.
I really like the focus that ITIL has now on value, and I think that's obviously very, very important because it should be that what it's about. It's not about how much money can we spend or how big of a drag can we be on the rest of the company because we have this expensive process center, but it's really on how can we return value back to the organization. And I think that oftentimes when organizations buy something, they might do a return on investment analysis, which is an important thing to do. But then I think that very few organizations then go back and see, well, did we really hit that target? Likewise, metrics are very important, but oftentimes we don't pay enough attention to really how we're doing and don't do enough retrospectives to try to improve. Is there any ideas that you can think of for that maybe sort of a quick win if somebody wants to focus more on value, or is there anything that you can think of that could be a quick win to get some sort of return back on the investment they're making in the service management side?
Well, it's to start simple, right? I think usually you're looking for some of the highest volume types of things to show the biggest and quickest return. And I mean, I'll use a common example, but things like password reset. Do you have the most absolute streamlined password reset process? Because if you're like any other organization, that's 70% of your traffic, right? That's 70% of your inbound incidents. So if you have automation in place, optimization in place, if you've got the absolute cleanest and quickest way through that, then you're good. But many people don't. It's a request that gets an email, that gets set in someone else's queue, gets sent to this team, no one gets assigned. It can take longer than it probably should. You take that as an example, and then you just work this model to apply these principles to get that optimized. So now you've delivered value in terms of people don't have to wait for their password to be reset. They submit the request, within minutes they're up and working again. And that's the value. That's the expected outcome. That's the delivery of value that this is talking about. So that's just an example, but within your own organizations, you're going to find that you have those top 2 or 3 things that if you were to focus on just those, don't try to boil the ocean, right? Don't try to solve world hunger. All you need to do is focus on those 2 or 3 types of common requests that are just going to make things a little bit better on a day-to-day basis for your entire organization. That's a good starting point.
Okay, and I think that's so important. It's almost like, maybe especially the bigger the company, the more important this is you almost need a maven, or you need somebody there to raise their hand and say, hey, this is something I want to take on, because I want to be that maven, or I want to be that monitor to make sure that we're going in the right place and doing the right things, because it's so easy. It goes back to that example that I said earlier about the simulation training. You just get into your own silo and you just start doing your own thing, because most of these organizations are big enterprises, and you forget about collaboration and what's really important, the overall goals. And I think that the training's important then to everybody, so they understand from a big picture how everything fits together. But in reality, so few people or so few organizations really do this very well. And I think that it's just important to step back and take some training once in a while, understand, do some retrospective, so you're continually improving. And these seem like basic things, but again, I don't see a lot, at least not the customers that we work with, a lot of them really do that. They just kind of want to do their job and move on. Is that what you see too? Is that fair, or am I being too hard on some of these guys?
Well, yeah, no, I think it's perfectly fair, and yes, I think we get ingrained in sort of our work steps and work methods. That being said, I know ITIL's gained in traction tremendously in the States anyway in the last decade or so, or ever since ITIL v2, quite frankly. But I do think you're finding more and more champions of this process methodology because of the actual tangible benefits that it's been able to provide. So there are folks in there now as to how influential they are, and are they able to actually convince upper management to sponsor things like service management offices and practices and designated roles of change managers and so on and so forth. That varies. That can vary quite a bit. That being said, I see that more and more, which is promising. I think it's in the right direction.
And some of this is being driven really by the DevOps side of it. Maybe you're a company that is going through some sort of digital transformation, and you have to compete with other companies out there, and you really have to be agile now, and you have to rely on technology more than ever before. And so you need, I'm just thinking out loud here a little bit, you need a real solid configuration management system in place, because you want to make sure that if you're going to roll something out, that you have some consistency out there and some procedures, because otherwise you're going to waste a huge amount of time when the other companies that you're competing with may already have their act together. So that's just one small example. Plus, there's the whole security side of things too, where the last thing you want to have to deal with is a virus of some sort. So lots to think about. I don't see any other questions out here, so I think that we can kind of wrap things up right now. And again, I wanted to say thank you, Ezra, for the very informational session today. I think ITIL is going to be around for a while longer. It's back, and it's better than before. So